What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. I just got done catching a really nice fish off of this interesting bank, and I want to show you how you can utilize banks like this on your lake in August and September to catch more fish. So what we have going on here, guys, is what looks like a channel swing bank with a nice transition from steeper bank to flatter bank. But because the water is so low on this lake right now, all these laydowns in front of me are super shallow, like in a foot of water. But there's a nice drop off actually about 25 to 30 feet off the bank where it then drops off into, let's say, 6 to 10 feet of water. And right where my bait's landing right now as I make a cast is about 2 feet of water. What I'm trying to do is actually target that break between the 2 foot of water and that 8 foot of water, but not actually fishing the bank itself. This is something I do a lot in this August and September time, whenever you're on a lake that has lower water levels. What I'm going to do is crank these banks with this specific crankbait right here. This is just a Megabass Super Z2. It's a small little 4 to 6 foot diving crankbait. It has a little bit longer bill, which helps it come through cover better. And it's really small, which is perfect for the forage we're dealing with today, where there's a lot of 1 to 2 inch shad just kind of floating around this creek. A lot of times in the late summertime, the shad will push into these creeks and they'll get all over these shallow laydowns and things like that. And it's really hard to actually get these fish to bite when they're just kind of roaming and chasing on those shad. So what I do instead is try to find these little subtle drop-offs just off the bank and try to target little pieces of brush and wood and all kinds of stuff that are up here. So right in front of me here we have a nice little lay down that I actually can see with my eyes. It's a little bit hard to see for you guys, but it's just in front of me here. And that's where I caught that fish. And I actually had to make repeated casts on this little lay down to get that fish to bite. But I basically am just making a bunch of casts with this little crankbait, hitting every piece of wood I can. I'm catching leaves and stuff like that. They're falling off these trees. Oh gosh, there was another one off that same lay down. I just missed him. What in the world? That was another fish right there. He just absolutely slammed it right off this little break. And let's see if I can get him to bite again. That's crazy. That's 2 fish now. And a lot of times when you're in these little deals, guys, where you have this drop off and stuff like that, it's worth making a lot of casts on these key little pieces of cover, because these fish can stack up like they will offshore in the summertime, and you can catch 2-3 fish off of one laydown, which is really interesting. And what you'll find is that these little transition zones will end up transitioning finally into a steeper bank. So there is a little bit steeper bank up here. So what you want to do is use either your mapping to kind of tell you where that drop off is. You can also use forward facing sonar like I have down here. I got my active target, and basically you can see as I scan over here, it's really flat. I'll try to get a little bit closer for you guys. It's really flat right in this area just to the left of the boat. And as I turn that active target, I don't know if you guys can see this super well, you can see it drops off in that 6 foot. So we're in that transition zone right there where that laydown is 2 foot, a couple feet in front of the boat, and then it drops off into the channel basically that direction. Hopefully you guys can see that. It's hard to see with all the sun. And all I'm going to do is try to, again, target that break, not actually fishing the bank itself, but fishing that little drop. And again, you can use mapping, you can graph up the side scan, you can use forward facing sonar, whatever you want to do. You can also fish some of these laydowns that are just kind of out in front of this deal, and you can pick up a jig to fish these. So with my jig setup I like to use, this is just a motion fishing 1/2 ounce flipping jig, and I have a this is an X-Zone crawfish on the back. And all I'm doing is basically going to fish the outside reaches of this laydown where they extend out over deeper water. I'm not actually going to try to fish way up in that laydown right now just because it's so shallow up there. And I'm going to make a lot of repeated casts with this jig, trying to cover every inch of this deal. A lot of times these fish won't chase all that much in September and October. You kind of have to put it right on their face. And I also find at times that these fish will be kind of suspended off the ends of these pieces of timber. So while I will also, let this bait sink to the bottom, a lot of times what I'll do is fire that jig up there. There you go, that's a better cast there. So I'll get that bait up there, and then I'll just swim it back to the boat over that laydown, not actually working it down on the bottom. And again, these fish will tend to suspend. And that's why I like to throw that crankbait a lot on these deals, just because a lot of these fish will be suspended in the tops of these trees, and that jig will fall past them a little bit too fast versus that crankbait that kind of stays out in front of them. And I'll also fish that crankbait a little bit different as well. All I'm going to do is cast that bait out there, and instead of just cranking it straight in, I'll kind of get it around that brush, and then I'll do short little reels. I won't actually twitch it, because if you twitch the bait with your rod, it'll cause the bait to actually come up in the water column, and you want that bait to kind of still dig down so it stays down that cover. But all I'm going to do is reel that maybe 10 times to get it to depth, then just do short reels. Pause and stop, pause and stop. And that will get that bait to somewhat suspend around a lot of those trees, especially when you really know you're targeting a specific tree, whether you can see it in front of you or you have it on the forward-facing sonar. And basically just working that crankbait with those small turns of the reel handle like that can be very effective and get those fish to trigger when they won't on anything else. You don't want a crankbait that digs too deep, but you also don't want one that digs too shallow. So I try to focus on a crankbait that dives about 4 feet deep, maybe 5 feet deep, and has enough of a bill where it'll deflect off the cover really well. So I like that Super Z2 by Megabass. Comes through cover super well. It casts really well for such a small bait. I mean, this is a tiny little bait. And I'll upgrade the stock treble hooks on here for Gamakatsu G Finesse series. I think these are the size 5 or size 6 size. And these are those kind of finessier series treble hooks. I just like to change them out of the stock hooks because these hooks are a little bit bigger than what comes stock on this bait. And I'm pairing that on 10-pound fluorocarbon to help with casting and getting it just a tiny bit deeper. And I'm putting that on Denali 7-foot medium power moderate action crankbait rod. 7-foot length helps me cast this bait really well. And you could go with a little bit shorter rod, probably, that's fine. And I'm just using a 6-to-1 gear ratio reel, 6.3-to-1 Black Max, though you could use a 7-to-1 or 8-to-1 or whatever. Not that big of a deal for this. So that's kind of what I'm going to do on these banks. And I'm just going to work down a lot of these banks like this. I'm going to keep an eye on that forward-facing sonar. We're kind of actually already getting away from where that drop-off is, and we're getting into that steeper stretch of the bank. So most of the time, I would actually already be moving to the next little channel swing like this, where there's that kind of flat sticking out, and run this pattern on a lot of different creeks. But you can also just stick around and fish in some of these flats and stuff behind you too, where there's isolated laydowns in 4 to 6 foot of water. That can also be pretty effective. And before I leave, I always like to flip some of these slightly deeper laydowns. You got this laydown here that's in about 4 foot of water, so it's got enough depth on it where you can actually potentially get bit on a jig. And the jig is a little bit better through laydowns like this, just because they're not that far off the bank. So by the time you get that crankbait down to depth, it's already almost out of the strike zone. So when you have a laydown that's so tight to the bank and slightly steeper section, I like to flip these laydowns and just kind of swim that jig. And again, it's kind of you're not really fishing the bank necessarily. What I'm really trying to do is fish the stuff that's 20, 30 feet out in front of the bank. That's really the key sweet spot for me that I'm wanting to target, because so many anglers are going to fish right up against the bank. That jig will work obviously pretty well at times up in those shallow laydowns, so don't be afraid to fish up there in those real shallow laydowns as well. But I would say the majority of my fish kind of come a little bit further off the bank, and you kind of have to get a sense for if the fish are in that like 4 to 6 foot, if they're a little bit deeper or shallower. Busting over here on shad, but I can't get those fish to bite. They're literally busting all around the boat today. And there's a bunch of shad on my forward facing right now too. And I just can't get any of those fish to bite. The only thing that's really working is targeting these laydowns that actually have a place where those fish can set up with the sun and ambush my jig, my crankbait, stuff like that. And I don't know if these fish are biting just when my bait comes by there as a reaction, or if having the shad by the laydown or whatever makes a big difference. Maybe they only bite when when those shad get close to the laydown. Not sure on the timing. Usually though, what I find is that I can fish these areas pretty quickly. If I don't get bit within 10 minutes on a stretch, I just keep moving on. Usually you're going to get a pretty decent reaction strike, though I do like to make a lot of casts on each target. So a lot of short repeated casts, fish kind of quick, don't need to like soak your bait down there, but also don't just make one cast per object. You can see I'm making multiple casts on this little lay down here from multiple angles. Hung up here. There we go. And also just make pitches down these flat banks too, these straight banks with some rock and stuff. Sometimes I'll set up on these little rocks. So don't really rule anything out until you kind of know exactly what's happening from a pattern perspective. I got this jig going now just because a lot of this brush again is really close to the bank, though there is a little bit of stuff out further. So I may, switch over to that crankbait again here in a second, but that's kind of the deal. Got hung up here again. There we go. You can just pop your rod sometimes and that bait will come undone. And with this jig, I mean, this is nothing fancy, just flipping jig. I like this flipping jig particular for motion fishing just because it has a hand-tied skirt, which helps when you're skipping. I really like to skip this jig around boat docks and stuff. It has a nice stout jig hook, so I like the shape of it. That's just kind of my new favorite little flipping jig. And I'm pairing that on 20-pound fluorocarbon line and a 7'4" heavy power fast action worm and jig rod in the Denali Lithium Pro lineup, and a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel. So nothing crazy, guys. And hopefully this was kind of helpful showing you how I would break down a little bank like this. If I was going to, move on, I probably would run another bank just like this. So probably what we'll end up doing is just trying to find another bank that sets up just like this in another creek and get after it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this quick video. It's a little bit different format than what I've been doing. I'm trying to experiment with a bunch of different types of videos. So let me know if you like this style. I didn't really have a ton of fish catches in here. I just put that one in just to show you that it worked. I don't want to have to put in like 10 fish catches in every video because it makes it hard to get enough content for this Declassified channel. So if you're okay with just one fish catch like that and then kind of me explaining off my experience, let me know in the comments. Helps, again, make more content for you guys. So again, let me know in the comments. We'll see you on the next video.